Inshallah, we're going to get started right away. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, and to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, and to call unto guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. So inshallah, today we're going to continue from where we left off in Surah Al Munafiqun. And did we have an assignment last week? Did we or did we not? What was that? We didn't. Yes, right. That's the correct answer. The first time we didn't have an assignment in a long time. Let me just, actually I need to share a screen. Okay. And last week we took the tafsir of the first 3 verses. And we did not take the ishara, which is sort of like the commentary that is, Imam Ibn Ajib, he calls it the ishara, which is allegorical. And alhamdulillah, I see new faces. So just what that means is these verses may be dealing with a particular context, but can we, as Muslims who are seeking to practice our faith for ourselves, apply those the sort of the lessons of those verses to ourselves as well? And this is what Imam Ibn Ajib does with the ishara. And so I'll read the translation, and then I'll go to the ishara, and then we're going to continue on, inshallah, afterwards for the tafsir for this week. And for those who are also new, I go according to, like, each week we take the amount of verses, because he separates the tafsir into small chunks, and we go according to how he separated it. Rather than taking a large amount at a time, we take the small section that he has divided the surah into. So with that being said, the translation, Surah Al Munafiqun, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When the hypocrites come unto thee, they say, we bear witness that you are, or thou art indeed the messenger of God. Yet God knows that thou art indeed his messenger, and God bears witness that the hypocrites are surely liars. They took their oaths as a shield, and thus turned from the way of God. Evil indeed is that which they used to do. That is because they believed and then disbelieved. So a seal was set upon their hearts, such that they comprehend not. So Imam Ibn Ajib, what I did this time is I summarized rather than word for word translation. He talks about in the ishara. So this is not the tafsir, this is the allegory, the reflection from the verses, which he mentions how if someone comes to the true shuyukh, right? This is not everybody, because we know there's this shuyukh al-ilm that's separate, and then there's shuyukh who can actually guide people in spiritually and tarbiyah. That's a whole nother category. Sometimes, I mean, usually the Shaykh of Tarbiyah is also a Shaykh of Ulum, but most of the time, the Shuyukh of Ulum are not Shuyukh of Tarbiyah. So that's something to pay attention to. So he says that if someone comes to the Shaykh saying that we want to take the spiritual path, we want to benefit from your Tarbiyah, we want to benefit from your guidance. But then after doing so, they kind of change their minds. And they're in this, they believe first in everything, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait, I don't want to do this. They're kind of in between two things. They're in this state of doubt. And they're in the state of doubt of, do I do this? Do I not do this? is this the person that I want to do this with or not? But this is already after they've already come and said they wanted to have this guidance from that particular sheikh. And he says that the actual reason for these doubts, it's different if it's, well, this is in his allegory. He's saying the actual reason for these doubts is because part of the nature of a spiritual path is a person has to look into their habits and they have to try to break their bad habits. And so when they see a struggle with like a bad habit, then that's when they have the doubt, because like the truth is uncomfortable. The truth means I have to change. The truth means that maybe I'm not so high and mighty. Maybe I have to be humble, you know? And so the Munafiqun, why did they reject the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Because they didn't want to lose their power. They didn't want to lose the stature they had in the society. So sometimes the ego is like that. It doesn't want to lose control over the person. It doesn't want to lose its place of mastery sort of over that person. And so when the ego is confronted in that way, it's like, you have to break this habit. The ego's like, no, maybe don't believe in this person. Don't do this thing because I want to stay in charge, right? So it believes, but it doesn't disbelieve out of, I don't know if that person's true. The actual reason is, I don't want to be unseated from my throne, right? And that's what the Munafiqun were like. So sometimes the person has that doubt because of specifically an unwillingness to break their own bad habits and to purify themselves. And so when the time comes, rather than sort of like taking things one step at a time, they actually return to kufr. Now here, it's not kufr of religion. These are believers, they're Muslim, but it's kufr as in a rejection of truth. And so they want to go back to a different lifestyle, because you can be, there's Islam, there's Iman, there's Ihsan, right? And the Arab, the Bedouins, when they came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, qalat al-Arabu amanna, we believe. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what's the response? No, don't say that. Qulu aslamna. No, you surrendered, you submitted, right? So it's possible for a person to be Muslim and to just submit, right, to the truth of Islam, and that's their level. So the person, when they basically confront this spiritual difficulty, they kind of want to go back to that Bedouin state rather than pursue faith, because there's resistance, right? They want to go back to that other state, which is, I'm okay with the Shahada, but I want to live a life that doesn't have spiritual struggles, I want to live. And so he says they return to the life that's obsessed with al-hudud, which is fortunes, my personal interests, the things that serve me, right? Because the spiritual path is about serving God, really about, it's a full surrender to God. But can a person submit and be a Muslim and still just want to be concerned about themselves and the things that serve them and live a lifestyle that's really selfish and greedy, right? The Muslim can be stingy. The Prophet ﷺ said a Muslim can be stingy, meaning they're still Muslim, but they got this issue, right? So spiritual diseases don't take a person out of Islam. But there are people who want to basically, like, when they sense that tension in themselves, they're kind of like, I am comfortable in this, being this kind of a Muslim, and I don't want to grow beyond this kind of a Muslim, right? I'm comfortable just being in this corner. I go shopping every day, whatever it is, whatever that consumptive quality, and it could be different in each person, right? And it doesn't mean that someone who's interested in the spiritual path is perfect. No, all it means is I'm willing to look at myself and be aware of myself and grow one step at a time. That's all it means. But there's a person who, as soon as they take one step, it's like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. So they're describing that. This is what he's describing. He's saying they want to return to a life that's simply obsessed with hudud. There were personal fortunes from this world. And he says that these people, they just don't understand. They do this because they don't understand. He says a beautiful statement is they don't understand yet the secret of their existence. So there's a beautiful sir. There's a beautiful secret that exists in every single human being. Right? So they didn't understand that they had that. Because that is more, if a person understands it, that would be more beloved to them than anything else in this world, essentially. And it has to do with their relationship with God. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is they didn't really understand why they were created. like this, that their life has a purpose beyond selfish consumption. And so that was sort of like the lesson that I think we can reflect on in terms of when we feel maybe like in trying to grow any kind of resistance, rather than believing and then disbelieving, right? In terms of what we're trying to do in terms of improve. They say, and they say this in like Western approaches to like coaching and things, is like everyone needs to learn how to take a break and not quit, right? Like you can take a break. You can take a break and be like, okay, I'm not ready for something, that's fine. Everyone should take a break. But that's not the same as I quit, right? I'm going to give up. And some people, they're kind of like, they fully quit. And then they wake up one morning and they're like, no, I'm going to do this again. And then they fully quit. And then they say, what am I going to do? Yeah, it's up and down. It's a very hardcore pendulum swinging. And if we can take rest breaks, right, and just give ourselves space to be on our journeys, we don't need to ever intend to quit. Like, it's a lifelong journey. It's maybe I didn't get it today, maybe I'll get it tomorrow. And part of it is also like not relying on ourselves, but relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having a good opinion of him. So that it's like you always will maintain your hope in him. You're not looking at this is hard or this is where I am right now. You're looking at who is he and what can he do for me, and what will he do for me if I simply, stay the path, stay the course. So yeah, so that was kind of his reflection from the first 3 verses. Actually, let me do a time check real quick. What time does Maghrib come in? 7 what? 7:40. Okay. All right. So for today, guess what Imam Ibn Ajiba, how many verses he takes for the next section? 1. Just 1. So forgive me for only doing 1. That's what he has. That's how he's broken it up. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا رأيتهم تعجبك أجسامهم وإن يقولوا تسمع لقولهم كأنهم خشب مسندة يحسبون كل صيحة عليهم هم العدو فاحذرهم قاتلهم الله أنى يؤفكون. And when thou seest them, their bodies impress thee, and if they speak, thou listenest to their speech. Yet they are like leaning timbers. They suppose that every cry is against them. They are the enemy, so be wary of them. May God curse them. How are they perverted? And perverted here is like away from the truth, misguided. And so I initially was going to take 2 sections together, but then when I saw how much there is for next week, I was like, there's no way we can combine the 2. So we'll take them as he takes them. So first, this sentence is usually understood in different books of tafsir to be, and Imam al-Qurtubi mentions this, that it's used to describe a particular munafiq that was known later on, and that was Abdullah ibn Ubay and some of his companions, who were said to be both handsome and well-spoken. Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says about them that their bodies impress people because of their magnitude, لِضَخَامَتِهَا. Like a dakham is like grandness, for lack of a better English translation. And so, how there's certain people, they take up space, kind of big, maybe their clothing is big too, it kind of like a peacock takes up space, so they were like that. They're physically impressive, okay? Their bodies are physically impressive. And also mentions that people, when they were looking at them amazes people. They would naturally feel amazed in looking upon them because their faces also had an allure or beauty in their faces. And so this is now people who physically are, let's say there's a grandeur to them, and they physically, and that's in terms of body and stature, their faces have like almost like a welcome to them, it's they're handsome physically and stature, and they're big. And then he mentions, and if they speak, thou listenest to their speech, like you listen to them. in one part, Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says that this verse, and there's a difference. Some say the first section of part of the verse is addressing the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So imagine if it is addressing the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second opinion is it includes the Prophet and the other believers. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is from those, is considered in the books of tafsir, is from those who were impressed by them. Like they come into a gathering, they would sit in his gathering, and because of the way they were physically, and sort of like their manner, people, they would, like when they would speak, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the believers would pay attention to their speech and listen to them. So he says, Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says it was because of their eloquence in speech, and that and their wit, like they were witty, they were smart, and as well as their speech had a sweetness to it. So like kind of like a captivating, charismatic personality. You know, it's interesting because I'll do a little tangent right here, is when I was in Egypt, I was studying in Al-Azhar, and I was a student at that time. And all of a sudden, while I was there, I started to get emails from sisters about, unfortunately, like bad situations, spiritual abuse situations. People I didn't know. I knew of the names because they were famous names, but I didn't know them directly. And they didn't know me at all. They just knew that like somehow they heard there's a sister studying and they wanted to tell a woman about it. And so they told me whatever they're going through. And it was a very difficult time to actually hear all those cases from different people and different names being outed in that way. And later on, I wrote an article series called When Religious Leaders Fail. They didn't have the word spiritual abuse back then. It was 2015 when I wrote the article series after coming back. But one of the things that I remember thinking to myself, and I had to like sit with real teachers to actually process what had happened, because that was a very hard thing to swallow. And one of the things that I remember feeling from the stories was that people were deluded and deceived because of charisma. Because, there's a charismatic appeal. So there's a confusion of charisma and I don't know, like that with righteousness and real knowledge and real wisdom. And frankly, I was one of the people who would have fallen into the same sort of mistake of thinking that if they sound good, they must be good. If it sounds right, it must be right. If it's like appealing. And one of the things that, alhamdulillah, like happened, not even intentionally, but by default, was after studying, I realized that this is not to say a disclaimer against any public speakers, but I realized after Azhar that the vast majority of what we get in the American landscape regarding religion in a public way is actually da'wah, it's wa'adh, it's not ilm. And like deep-seated ilm, there's not a whole lot that actually have, even on an outward level, like real ilm. And that was after, like, I remember before Azhar, I could listen to so many people and enjoy it. And after Azhar, I was like, can't enjoy this. I can't enjoy it. And no fault to the speaker, because they're not spiritual abusers. It was just more like, okay, this makes you feel good, but like, where's that like heart, like that quality substance? Like, where can I get the substance from? And that was important for me, because then I could see, like, from those who were producing in the English language, that like there's a handful of scholars that are in America, and I'm like, you guys are the only one who sound like my Azhar books. No one else does. Everyone else, not that they're doing anything bad, even they're doing da'wah, they're doing wa'adh, but there's a differentiation between again, like something that is a spiritual reminder or a beneficial reminder, which we as believers are all supposed to do that for each other as well. Like that's, the believers are supposed to be like mirrors for each other. So there's nothing wrong with that. But to expect someone who maybe doesn't have a deep foundation in religion, for them that person who sounds eloquent to give you a fatwa, and they can't. So it's not even, but they think they can, because we've thrown around titles, like everyone has a title. And whether or not they've studied, whether or not they have teachers, whether or not anything, like in most of the cases actually that came were people who had no formal educational background, no formal educational training. So anyways, that's a tangent. But one thing I found was charisma being a reason why people were just kind of taken in, to like that eloquence, that sweetness of speech. And not, sometimes it's the person, it's not like they're a fraudulent, like they're not like a charlatan, I'm gonna take advantage of you type person. Sometimes it's a human deficiency or weakness, and they were just not there. But I remember afterwards feeling like I want my teachers to be boring. I want my teachers to be like the kind that you fall asleep in their class. And but I just want them to be good. Like I just want them to be good people who like they're qualified in what they're teaching, and they don't have to sound amazing on a huge stage with 10,000 people. They could just be someone who speaks very like simply, but let their knowledge be sound, and let them be qualified to say what they're going to say, and let them actually be people who practice like what they're about. So and I have this disposition towards male teachers, by the way. Like I don't want to hear a khutbah where some man is yelling at me. I can't, no offense. Like no more yelling. I'm not Arab, first off. So culturally it's like a difference too. But I don't want to hear that. Just don't yell at me for Jummah. But the opposite is the case when for female speakers, I want to hear my sisters scream on stage. So that's great, but you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like I want to hear them, because in my time, this was like the time when I was growing up, there were no female teachers or speakers at all in any function. And so just because of the silencing of sisters, like that I saw happen repeatedly, I'm actually like, when I see the sister, I'm like, just yell at me, just be my sister, just give it to me, but this is a personal tangent. Forgive me. We'll go back to tafsir. But the main point was this idea of don't be taken in by charisma, and be really, really wary of charisma, because even people who, like one of my teachers said that the sheikh who's eloquent, and he's a qualified sheikh, his charisma is one of the ways that God is testing him. Right. So like as a way of, to make them speak still and not, with the intention of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he's talking about the end of times. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, there will come at the end of time men who will deceive the world. They will wear clothing of sheepskin, and their words will seem sweeter than honey, but their hearts will be the hearts of wolves. Allah will say, are you deluded, or do you brazenly defy me? So this statement, are you deluded, or do you brazenly defy me? That's a very similar ending to the end of this verse, right? Anna yufakun, like what is wrong with you, right? Like because you're dealing with God, right? So are you deluded, or do you brazenly defy me? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I swear by myself to afflict them with a calamity that will leave the wise bewildered. So it's a very hadith Qudsis, right? They're usually very soft and gentle. When one comes like this, it's one that we have to pay attention to, that this type of person, and this is not the person who's weak and doing something that's beyond their capacity and they don't realize it. This is a person who's a fraud. This is a person who shows up to town and says, I'm going to take advantage of all these people. And there are people who do this. And my mom used to tell me in Afghanistan, there were people who would like take people's money and have men like divorce their wives, and then that person would marry that person's wife. And like they would use a religious position or title to sort of just take advantage of people. So this is a form of nifaq. It's a form of hypocrisy to front in that way. And may Allah protect us all and shield all of us and our families from experiencing that. So he says, because of their eloquence and wit and sweetness of speech, imagine the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who's the prophet of God, and the other believers are amazed by them. Okay, so when they come into the gathering, if it's not Allah exposing them, the default setting for people is, wow, look at them, right? Like that should give us some alarm. And he says, yet they are like leaning timbers, okay? And like leaning timbers indicates that the hypocrites, they have no roots of their own to support them. but they rely upon another structure for support. That's one of the indications. There's more. Before I can, yeah, there's more. Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says that these, the Munafiqeen and Abdullah bin Ubay would actually come to the majalis of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they would lean against the wall. And when they'd come and then they'd like speak in those gatherings, right? Everyone's like amazed at them, their presence in the gathering, but they're just kind of like leaning against the wall. They're like in a relaxed way. And they're being compared to the way timbers are lean against a wall. And he says it's because if something is solid wood and it's useful and it's beneficial and it's substantive, then that wood is used to make the roof, or it's used to make the wall, or it's used as part of the structure of a space. But when it's useless, it's the extra wood that people just lean it against the wall because it actually doesn't have any substance to it. So they're being described in that way. And he says they would sit in the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad, they would impress everyone. So he says that they were similar to how timbers are actually hollowed out wood. They were hollow, they were empty of knowledge and goodness, even though they seemed on the outside like they had something. And he says because wood, when it's deemed strong, right, is used in the way I mentioned, but when it is considered weak or hollow, then it leans up against a wood. And also it's, what do you do with useless wood? What do you do with it? Firewood. There's another analogy with that is like this hollowed out wood that gets used to feed a fire. Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, this is very strong language, right? Like it's a very, very, very strong language that's being used against the Munafiqeen in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Even the analogy of them being like timbers is one like that. Now, here's another interesting part of the verse. They suppose that every cry is against them. We could spend a long time just talking about that. Let me just check what time it is for. Okay, good, we have time. Okay. So they suppose that every cry is against them. The actual, in the tafsir, the Arabic, I wrote it down, he says, because of the istiqrar al-ru'ab fi qulubihim. Okay, so they have this fear that's established in their hearts. Okay, they're constantly threatened. Everything that happens, they take it as a threat to their selves in some way. Narcissists, by the way, are like this. They are constantly threatened by anything. If they hear something, it's a paranoia, as there's a suspicion. They must have been talking about me. This must be about me. And they're so afraid of getting found out. Like, I don't want anyone to know, to uncover this thing. The part of it is that if they are found out, they would have to face the charges of treason, right? But another part of it is like they need to maintain this illusion that they have in front of other people, and of being strong, of being mighty, of being on top, of being whatever it is. So Imam al-Suyuti, he mentions that the hypocrites are afraid every time they hear a battle cry, because they fear that their true nature, and in some cases their alliances with the enemies, may have been discovered, right? So anytime anything happens, they're just, because they're secretly doing bad things, they're afraid that it's something about them has been discovered, in which case their oaths might be discovered to be false and thus no longer protect them. So when we think about this idea of they are, Imam al-Qurtubi, he says, they're like shapes without spirits or bodies without minds. They're, because of the fact that they saw the truth and decided to just reject it, not just reject it, but defy it, really, to fight it. In secret, they're fighting the truth, and on the outside, they're appearing like they follow it. So something that's interesting here is the narcissist, right, is paranoid. The narcissist is paranoid, I will be found out. And what's subhanAllah, sincere people are the opposite of that. They will actually say, I'm not what you think of me. I am less than that. I'm not worthy of this. Stop telling me that, and like you could, this is subhanAllah. We had an experience recently with an amazing teacher who has like a lot of qualifications. And as much as we were trying to like ask for certain things from him in terms of help or advice or whatever, he kept saying, I'm not worthy of this. I'm not worthy. We're like, we know you're worthy. We know your resume. Like, we know your teachers. So, like, we know you're worthy. But he was not saying it out of a desire not to serve. He's actually that humble. He doesn't see himself in the way that others see him. So he just couldn't, accept that he kept saying things like, oh, I want to benefit from you. And we're like, this is not how it works. But anyways, there are people who are like that. And subhanAllah, if you've experienced people who are like that, and I've had the blessing of sitting with teachers who are like that, they repel praise. They repel anyone giving them authority or station or anything like that. They're just like very much like, don't do it. Stop. I don't like it. Stop it. I remember once there was a teacher and I forgot what it was. I kept saying sorry about something. He just said, stop apologizing to me. Stop saying sorry. I was like, okay. It's like, he doesn't want to be even apologized to for simple things. So, so there's a huge difference between the people who are deemed themselves unworthy. And oftentimes, by the way, the ones who are like that, because they're like that, the community doesn't recognize them. We tend to recognize the flamboyant, the big clothes, the big turban and the big beard and the big, like dakhm, like that, what's mentioned, that's what we want. Someone who takes up a lot of space and whose voice bellows. And it's like, that's not representative of qualification. If anything, I'd be worried about someone who needs to take up that much space. But usually, like, subhanAllah, even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was described that if he was in a gathering of people, you'd have to point him out to someone who didn't know him, not someone who's like clearly, standing out amongst others. Also, another thing that I noticed that we do in America, and I say America because Americans, a lack of like religious literacy creates situations where people can misunderstand things, right? And so I went to a convention or conference, I won't say which one, and they had really powerful speakers. They were not Shuyukh, most of them, but it was a big gathering of Muslims in which the people who were scholars were given very little time to address the audience, and organizers and activists were the main ones on stage almost the entire time. And so what I noticed from that was okay, so like my morale as a Muslim in America has been increased by this gathering. Like I have morale, like we're in this together, and there's organizers speaking, and inshallah our communities are getting built, and there's masajid being built and things like that. But it did nothing for my himma. It did literally, himma, right? Like did nothing for my directedness towards God. And I remember being confused because when I was younger, I'd go to these same gatherings and I would feel like, oh, I got a spiritual high, and I was confusing the two. One of them is like more morale, like being amongst Muslims and feeling good about being a Muslim in America and growing up as a like hijabi and things like that. It's more like about my identity as a Muslim. And the other one is like, no, it's really about God, like who really directs me to God. And that can be someone who does not sound good on stage, does not, like there's no like fireworks going off in the background. And subhanAllah, a lot of times people who they affect your himma. If you're at the moment when you're sitting with them, it feels very normal. But when you go home, right? SubhanAllah, like the perfume smeller, the way good company is like, even if you didn't buy the perfume from them, the fragrance is still on you when you leave. When you go home after you've left their company, you feel like your directedness towards God has been renewed, right? Like there's something in what they said. It could be just one line, it could be something, but you're like, okay, like this is the thing that I was left with. And sometimes shockingly, because you're not expecting it, because they're so simple. They're so like, adi jiddan, like jiddan, like very, very. So, yeah. So one of the signs is that your actual himma, your personal relationship with Allah and your directedness towards Allah has been bettered. And they left that with you. And maybe not even intentionally, like that's just their presence, their hal, their state was something that left its goodness on you because you shared company with them. And that's very different than big conferences, organizers and activists and civil rights. And I'm not saying those things don't have their place, but we shouldn't confuse the two, right? Like this big gathering of a lot of Muslims that's talking about civil rights, it's a good cause and more power to everybody trying to do something good. But like, I can't use activism as my backdoor to religion, right? Does that make sense? Like it doesn't replace religion. It doesn't replace my own like path towards God, that my directedness towards God. It can be a part of it, right? Because activism with the right intention, all those things can be a part of it, but it's not all of it. It's definitely not all of it. And it behooves us to sort of like separate the two and benefit as much as we can, but know that we still need like the inheritors of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in our lives. So the hypocrites are afraid that every time they hear a battle cry, that they're going to be found out, and they are constantly threatened. So what is one lesson that we can take for ourselves? And aside from the issue of the munafiqeen who are actually trying to actively working against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is the quality of always being threatened by everything is actually not a good quality, right? What does it reveal if you're threatened by two people are sitting together and having a good time? If you feel threatened by that, is that their fault? Right? No, so it's like that is something for us to work through. Like if we ever get that, just know there's something there that needs to be resolved. Maybe we need therapy, maybe we need counseling or something. Maybe there's something but we shouldn't actually feel threatened when good things are happening, period. That should not create a feeling of feeling threatened inside. Even if something is not a good thing happening, let's just say it's a bad thing. For us to assume everything is about us is an egoistic sort of impulse. So they literally, the word that's used is every waqi'ah in the tafsir, every occurrence, every event, every happening must be against them. So Imam Ibn Ajibah, he elaborates on this a little bit more. He says, so if a caller calls the army, right? Someone comes and is telling the army there's something going on, all of a sudden they're threatened. They're like, this must be about us. We must have been found out, right? Because they're guilty on the inside, they're guilty. He said, if an animal has gotten away, if someone comes and says one of the animals has escaped, something as mundane as that, they feel threatened. No, this must be a cover for something that has to do with that has to do about me. If there's a lost item or a lost person, he says, something that's just lost, and everyone's like, oh, this has been lost, we need to find it. They think it's about them. And it's happening against them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them, right? In the Qur'an, I realized, subhanAllah, because before I used to say Allah only ever tells us, and this is my shallow understanding, so forgive me for that, that Allah only tells us to take the shaitan as an adu, right? He only refers to them as, to take him as our enemy. And it's true, the actual language, take him as your enemy, applies to shaitan. But here, Allah also calls the munafiqun our enemies. And he doesn't say take them as your enemy, but he says to be wary of them. Like, meaning have a cautiousness, use your aql, use your intelligence in terms of knowing if there's harm that's coming from people in a very particular way. Don't fall for sweetness of speech. And Imam Ibn Ajibah, he says, don't fall for the beauty of their logic, because there are going to be people who can give beautiful arguments. And he says they are the enemy because they are completely established in rejecting the truth. They are, the munafiqeen were very conscious about the reality of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, like really recognizing that he was the Prophet, then believing that, and then turning back and then rejecting it and saying, we're going to fight him. So they are that complete enemy. He says, al-adu al-kamil. So, and he says that they bear witness to one thing on the outside, and their hearts believe in the opposite of what they say and witness to. there's another lesson we can take from that in terms of the heart and the speech having like conforming to each other, right? So alhamdulillah, I don't think anyone in this room would ever be anything close to a munafiq, not even 1% close, right? But you can take a lesson, or we can all take a lesson that what we have in our hearts and what we testify to in particular, bear witness to, should be consistent, right? And that's if you feel, for example, uncomfortable with something that is wrong, and with it's not something you can change. The Prophet ﷺ said the least, like the thing of faith is to actually just stay silent, right? But we shouldn't encourage something that deep down we feel is wrong. Does that happen sometimes in our communities? Does that happen? Yeah, how? Yeah. Yeah.
I need to think.
Okay. Okay. Can I tell you guys something I've seen on social media? Is sometimes this will happen where a sister who may have been wearing hijab and practicing is going through a particular kind of tribulation in her life. Then there's a picture of her without the hijab, and she's at a club, like she's at a bar, a bunch of people around her, whatever it is. She's posting it. And a bunch of friends might comment on the picture and say, wow, you look so beautiful, you look so nice, oh, we miss you, all that kind of stuff. Their intention is very good. Their intention is, this sister obviously is going through something and I want to have a relationship with her. Did they need to praise the action? No. They could say, it's good to see you and I miss you, right? But if you go extra, it's that extra where there's a little bit of yourself that you're, like it's not consistent, right? And it doesn't mean you have to say you shouldn't be doing that. That's not what we're just saying, like, don't, as much as we can, we want our speech to be consistent with what we bear testimony to in our hearts. And we can stay silent about certain things. We should stay silent about certain things. But we shouldn't like go the extra part where and there's no kids in the room today. Okay, alhamdulillah. There's another thing that has happened where on social media, it's all on social media, but someone may have quote unquote come out that was Muslim. Does that make you guys understand what I'm talking about? And people will say things on there, like, I know they don't believe in that. And the comments will be like, oh, we hope you're happy together and you're this and that. And you're like, I don't know about that. You don't need to go there. If you don't want to like write someone off, that's fine. There's a way you can have an authentic relationship with that person without going against what you bear witness to in your own heart. And that's what I think is maybe something that we can take as a lesson for us, is that from what the words that Imam Ibn Ajib, he says, is that they bear witness to one thing in their hearts, and then they and what they say is different than that. Yeah.
This is very scary. Because sometimes we really do things we don't realize it.
Yeah.
Like you said, the Facebook.
Yeah.
Like you put one comment and it's like you don't really mean it.
Yeah.
Like maybe even 50%.
Yeah.
Not 100%. So this is here. It's like. But that it's gonna make the other person feel good.
Yeah. So I mean, if it's truthful speech, there's nothing wrong with it. But if it's not, the problem is when it's not truthful. The problem is when it's not the kind of like you're going against what you believe, right? When you go against what you believe. So I would say another example of this is a Muslim sister is marrying a non-Muslim, right? And she's like, I really want you to come to the wedding and I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And it's like, I don't want to lose this person as my friend, right? And I don't want to lose the relationship I have, because I want to make sure that this person always feels like they have a way back to practice or to whatever it is. But it's not good for her or good for me to lie about this and to be like, I'm so happy for you, this is wonderful, and like make a big deal about it and like become the maid of honor and all these things. Like, and part of it is like for us to just set boundaries with politeness, like with kindness and politeness and mercy and compassion, but also be consistent and have have a dignity that's based in that, like in the end, I want what I say on the outside and what my heart is bearing testimony to on the inside to be consistent in front of God.
I think nowadays
Mhm,
people don't say
mhm,
what is wrong and what is bad,
Mhm.
and that also is like people don't, like people are saying, so they are growing more and more.
mhm.
Before, in back our days, my aunt, my mom, anybody would come out and say, no,
Yeah,
this is not right.
yeah.
Nowadays, it's not like that,
Mhm.
like it's like, why you are not my mom or aunties, or, nobody can say anything.
Mhm, mhm. Well, part of even like in terms of nasiha is nasiha is to bring out the best in a situation. So if saying something will make the situation worse, we actually are not supposed to say it. And if saying something will better the situation, right? And it's about saying the truthful thing that's going to make the situation better. And one of the reasons why I think people have abandoned it altogether is because it was in the past, at least when my memories of the old times and stuff, is people they did not care how it's going to land. They just said things and it damaged. It didn't help. It was not healing or constructive. It was destructive. It was part of what led to people leaving the masjid altogether and like abandoning Muslim spaces and practice. So I agree with you that like we have to find a way that when we say what we're going to say, it lands in the right place. First off, it's coming from the right place. And then it also lands in the right place that actually helps that other person or betters the situation with them. And so that's part of like the intention in terms of how we approach these things. And also like when in doubt, it's actually better not to say anything. Like if you don't know if it's going to make it cause harm, like if there's the benefit and harm is 50-50 in your mind, the scholars, they say you only act on something when you know that the benefit, even if it's just a little bit more, the benefit is going to outweigh the harms. But if you're in total doubt, like I don't know if this is going to damage or better, then you actually don't do any either. You take the safer route. That's a very strong statement as well. May God curse them. And what does qatala mean in Arabic?
Fight.
It's fight. Yeah, God is at war with them. Allah is at war with them. So this is a way of saying that they're cursed. Is that and we're not taking the future verses right now because it comes in the next section, but we're going to return to what that means and how Allah relates to the munafiqeen. Inni yufakun or anna yufakun. Essentially, it's saying, how can you be on the side that is against the truth when you know it's the truth and you know that God exists? Like it's almost like it says it's ta'ajjub from the ignorance. Like how could you choose to do something that is so wildly ignorant and lost? That's sort of the style, or that's the tone of what is being said to them. Especially because Abdullah bin Ubay, what was his background? Like he wasn't an idol worshiper. What was he before? What was that? He was Jewish.
Yeah.
He was Jewish. So they know about the prophets. They know about Musa alayhi salam and Pharaoh. They know, like, how can you who has this and you knew all this, how could you choose to do this right now? You're asking for it. There's a rebelliousness against God that's in this as well. Yeah. I actually think about that in terms of fraudulent people who come and they tell someone, oh, I'm going to do shifa for you and ruqya and all this stuff, and in the end they're actually dealing with like things like black magic. Like they're literally making deals with the devil. And you're like, you couldn't be more dumb. You couldn't be more dumb. You don't have to be a practicing person. Just don't make a deal with the devil. Like you went from lost to more lost. So again, may Allah protect us all and guide us all, inshallah. It's time for Maghrib. So we're actually going to stop here in the tafsir. Oh, okay. I think we'll have to meet again after Maghrib. We're gonna ask Marcus to come and lead the prayer, inshallah, and then, did he leave? Do we have no brothers here? Okay. Good. Okay, so we'll take a break, inshallah, for Maghrib and then restart. Okay. So inshallah, the only thing I wanted to spend a little bit of time on before we close is the assignment for this week. And what is the opposite of nifaq?
Honesty.
Yes, and what's that word in, what is it in Arabic? Like, Saraha? Okay, Saraha is being like straightforward, right? Okay, but there's another word for truthfulness, sadiq, yeah? It comes from sidq, right? Truthfulness is sidq. And one of the things that the scholars always talk about is having sidq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first and foremost. And so the opposite of the hypocrite is actually the muflis, the person who is sincere. And this is something that Sheikh Ahmed Saad, when he visited, he talked about, alhamdulillah, here on Wednesday or Tuesday night, he talked about it at length. And then I actually had the blessing of being able to catch his Sunday program in Ta'lif. And so he talked about it more there. I want to share with you all some of how he some of the things he touched on, and maybe a way that we can incorporate this. Now, we already know from Islam and from the religion, from the reminders, that renewing the intention, like that we're doing something for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a part of our faith. That we try to do that in the beginning of things, in the middle of things, and after things are over, we also try to do that. And so there's that. But one of the things he actually mentioned in the Bay Area, and I want to get the words right. He said, and he was commenting on this beautiful hikmah from the hikmah of Ibn Ata'illah. He said, a sign of success in the end is turning to Allah in the beginning. And this idea of that we're not working alone in anything that we're doing, that we're always turning to Allah in the beginning and throughout. And he says, how do we turn to Allah in the beginning of our journeys? In the beginning, he says, we make Allah the start of every journey. And we also, when we think about success, right? We always have different definitions of success. What is success? What is failure? Did I fail in this? Did I succeed in this? Something that I remember Imam Zayd Shakir, he said that as Muslims, we don't talk about success and failure. We just talk about niyyah. It's not about success or failure, it's about niyyah. Because we can always hear this, the results are with God. But then if it's about niyyah, it's about having intention and taking time for that intention, then how do we do that and at the same time be people who rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then don't attribute good to ourselves? How do you do that? Because if you make niyyah, what if you make a lot of intentions and all of those good things that you intended happened? What's the next test to truthfulness and ikhlas with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yeah, we're like, I did that. I intended that and it happened. I intended this good and this, it manifested. So, and so it's part of like approaching things with ikhlas and sidq is not just at the beginning, but when something is done. He actually made a beautiful commentary on, he actually said something that was, I had never heard that verse mentioned in that way. And when Musa alayhi salam, when he goes and he helps the two daughters of Shu'aib to water their animals, then he sits down and he rests and he says special words. What are do you guys remember the words that he says? Rabbi bima anzalta alayya min khairin faqir. My Lord, I am in need of any good that you bestow upon me. Right? So I thought in tafsir before, I always thought this is like, he's escaped, he has nothing, he helps people from nothing, then he sits down and makes dua that Allah grants him khair, right? That's how I always understood the story. And he said, the way he commented on it, to me, this is Shaykh Ahmed Saad, because I actually asked him about this question after the program. Remember when I raised my hand and my husband had to pick on me? So I had to talk to him about it afterwards. So this is the conversation that we had. And he said we should have that attitude after the deed is done. After the good deed is done, is actually that this statement of Musa alayhi salam was about his helping, his ability that Allah gave him to help the daughters of Shu'aib. He's thanking God that he was in need of that khair from God. So it's not like just give me something now in the future. This is actually how he's approaching the deed of having helped someone, meaning like this is a gratitude to God. Like I'm in need of any good that you would bestow upon me, including the good that just happened, which he helped other people. So so after a good deed, to actually have that attitude that I am faqir for that good that you bestowed upon me, that comes from you to me, right? So that's one of the parts of the assignment, I think, inshallah, for this week is obviously to spend time in making intentions and good intentions, but then after a good thing is done, to kind of, if you want to make the dua specifically, you can. It's really about taking time out to reflect on whatever good to actually be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not from ourselves, so that we're not deceived, and so that we're not we don't see these things as things that feed the ego, but rather it's about relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He also said something else about the intention itself. I'm trying to find it. Okay. The word Noah, right? The famous hadith that everyone gets what they intend, right? And the word that's used in the hadith is Noah. Noah is also linguistically, he says it's the seed inside of a fruit. So like all of a peach, right? The seed inside of it is what is the cause of the whole fruit, right? It's the seed. And so the seed of every action should be that it's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he said, and others have said that there's another linguistic lesson from the word Noah, right? Intended. And that's, he said there's something in Arabic where sometimes when the letters are flipped around, they add more meaning to the shade of this word. So it's actually the word wana. And wana is to delay or slow down something. So I think one of the reasons why we as a community in America, especially, we're always very rushed. We're so rushed with our lives. We're trying to do so much in so little time, that this idea of slow down long enough to establish your intention, deliberate on the intention, because that's really what makes the deed great. It's not you could be running around, and if it's for the wrong reason, how much did we get from it, right? So slow down in the beginning. The seed of the deed is to slow down at the beginning, right? Enough to make that intention for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to really know what we're intending. And, our deeds are not about speed. They're about, they should be about Allah. And I think about it with myself sometimes, like when he was explaining this, I was like, most of the time I am halfway through something before I think about why am I doing this, And it's like, no, we have to catch ourselves. And so I think that's one of the things to start with. And it reminds me, I think I might have shared this with you guys in the Gambia. I remember asking Shaykh Muhammad about this as well, in terms of sometimes you have many things to do and how it's really hard to stop one thing and then go to the next thing. And like, I usually intend 3 things and I do one of them because once I start it, I just get carried away with it and I can't stop it. And he said that and I think I did mention it to you guys, but it wasn't on Zoom, that you start, it's like guiding a horse. You start from a stopped position, right? So when you think about starting from a stopped position, it means you're not just doing things as they come, but you have when you have a plan in your mind. You do have a plan, so there is some planning. So I remember I also asked Sheikh Ahmed, because I was like, this is something I struggle, how do we plan things, but then also not be from the people of tadbir? Tadbir is like that over planner, And he said, because the way that we do this is that we make an intention, we plan the thing that we intend to do, but we have to completely let go. After we've attempted that plan or made that intention in that plan, we're totally accepting of whatever Allah has written as results or has written to happen after that. Like, we're very, very flexible with the plan. We're not like it has to happen my way. It's more like this is worship. So I do this as worship, and then Allah will take care of the rest. And so and And he mentioned this as well in the Bay Area as well. So this is part of what we're going to try to do, inshallah. And you could do something for you, for depending on who, like your stage in life. For some people, they'll make a plan by having a planner, planning out their day at some level. And if you're not someone who can do that because there's kids climbing all over you all the time, some people are in that boat, and then I'm kind of out of it now. But some people are still in that boat where, he said something that was when he was with us, which was that if we keep renewing intention, no matter what we're doing, like just at least take time to like catch yourself throughout the day and come back to your intentions, then all of your day will have a blessing in it because you kept renewing the intention. So that's the assignment, is about the renewal. Take the time, that we all take the time to renew the intention. Whoever has capacity to plan in that way and let go, to do that as well. And if we see something that we've intended happen, to really treat it with this attitude of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, that I was faqir for this. I was the one most in need of God giving me whatever that good was. So that's, inshallah, the assignment for this week. And I believe it's time to close. Normally I would try to leave some time for questions, but as usual, you guys let me talk too much. It's your fault. Next week, there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be at least 4 verses that we cover in tafsir. So don't feel bad that this week we did 1. Next week, inshallah, this chunk is longer. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى وجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم آمين يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا مقسوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us amongst your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us the success to act upon what you have taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven. Not one of us wretched or deprived, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.